My stepmother, Patricia, stood at my father's funeral reception, champagne glass in hand, casually telling everyone she was putting our childhood home on the market next week. Time for a fresh start, she announced with a bright smile, as if she hadn't just buried her husband of 4 years. She had no idea that 3 hours later, when Dad's attorney read the will aloud, her entire world would collapse in front of 30 witnesses. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Janice Coleman, and I'm a 38-year-old forensic accountant from Portland, Oregon. My father, William Coleman, owned Coleman and Associates, a thriving insurance brokerage firm that he built over 25 years. The company specialized in commercial property insurance and had contracts with some of the largest developers on the West Coast. Dad was methodical, careful, and incredibly protective of the things he valued most: his business, our family home, and his 3 children. When my mother, Elena, died 6 years ago from complications following heart surgery, our family was shattered. Mom had been the glue that held everything together. She organized family dinners every Sunday, remembered everyone's birthdays, and somehow managed to keep Dad grounded despite his workaholic tendencies. Her death left a void that none of us knew how to fill. Dad threw himself deeper into work, my younger brother Marcus moved to Seattle for a software engineering job, and my sister Rebecca focused on finishing her medical residency in Chicago. For 2 years, Dad lived alone in our sprawling 4-bedroom house in the Pearl District. The house Mom had decorated with such care, where we'd grown up playing in the backyard garden she'd planted, felt too big and too quiet for one person. We worried about him constantly. He'd lost weight, rarely socialized, and seemed to age a decade in those 24 months. When he met Patricia Hendricks at a wine tasting event downtown, we were actually relieved. Patricia was 44, a real estate agent with luxury Portland properties who specialized in high-end residential sales. She was polished, energetic, and seemed genuinely interested in Dad's stories about building his business. She had never been married, claimed she'd been too focused on her career to settle down, and appeared charmed by our family traditions. Within 8 months, they were engaged. Dad seemed lighter, more social, almost like his old self again. The wedding was small but elegant, held in the garden Mom had loved so much. Patricia insisted on keeping the ceremony intimate, just immediate family and a few close friends. She moved into our childhood home, bringing her contemporary furniture and gradually replacing Mom's warm, traditional touches with sleek, modern pieces. The changes were subtle at first: new throw pillows, different artwork, a more minimalist aesthetic that Patricia called updating the space for modern living. At first, we appreciated that Patricia encouraged Dad to be more active. They traveled together, attended social events, and she even convinced him to take salsa dancing lessons. Dad laughed more than he had since Mom's death. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Family dinners became less frequent because Patricia preferred restaurants over home cooking. Holiday traditions that Mom had established were deemed outdated and replaced with Patricia's preferences. The most significant change was Dad's relationship with his business. For years, he'd included us in major decisions, seeking our input even though none of us worked directly for the company. Marcus had studied business before switching to tech, Rebecca understood financial planning from her medical practice, and my forensic accounting background made me particularly valuable for reviewing contracts and identifying potential risks. These family business discussions had been a tradition since we were teenagers. Patricia gradually inserted herself into these conversations, claiming she needed to understand Dad's work to be a supportive wife. Her real estate background gave her just enough knowledge about commercial properties to sound informed, but her suggestions often showed a fundamental misunderstanding of insurance principles. When Dad would explain why her ideas wouldn't work, she'd smile and say she was still learning, but we noticed him becoming less likely to discuss business matters when she was around. More troubling was how Patricia began positioning herself as Dad's primary advisor for personal financial decisions. She convinced him to refinance the house, arguing that interest rates were favorable and the extra cash could be invested in her real estate ventures. Dad had always been conservative with money, preferring stable investments over risky ventures, but Patricia's enthusiasm was infectious. She spoke confidently about property flips and development opportunities that could double their money within 2 years. The refinancing bothered me professionally. As a forensic accountant, I'd seen too many cases where financial manipulation began with seemingly reasonable requests for access to equity or changes in asset ownership. When I expressed concerns to Dad privately, he assured me that Patricia's real estate expertise complemented his insurance knowledge, creating opportunities neither could pursue alone. He seems genuinely excited about their joint ventures, describing plans to purchase distressed properties, renovate them, and resell them for substantial profits. Rebecca and Marcus shared my unease, but none of us wanted to interfere in Dad's newfound happiness. He'd been through enough grief after Mom's death. If Patricia made him feel optimistic about the future, who were we to question his judgment? We told ourselves that Dad was a successful businessman who'd built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. He could certainly handle one real estate agent, even if she was his wife. Our concerns seemed petty compared to Dad's obvious contentment. Patricia organized surprise parties for his birthday, planned elaborate anniversary celebrations, and frequently posted photos on social media showcasing their glamorous lifestyle. She tagged herself at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and exclusive events, always mentioning how grateful she was for her amazing husband who made such experiences possible. Dad appeared to enjoy the attention and social recognition that came with her extroverted personality. The dynamic shifted dramatically when Dad was diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer in March 2023. The oncologist caught it relatively early, and the prognosis was excellent with proper treatment. Surgery was scheduled for May, followed by a short course of radiation therapy. Dad's doctors expected a full recovery, estimating he'd be back to normal activities within 3 to 4 months. It should have been manageable, almost routine given modern medical advances. Patricia's response was immediate and overwhelming. She appointed herself Dad's primary caregiver and medical advocate, insisting that he needed complete rest and minimal stress during treatment. She researched treatment options extensively, contacted multiple specialists, and even suggested they consider experimental therapies at research hospitals. Her dedication seemed admirable, but it came with an increasingly possessive edge that made family visits complicated. She scheduled our visits around Dad's treatment appointments and recovery periods, explaining that too much stimulation could interfere with his healing process. Phone calls were limited to specific times when Dad felt strong enough to talk, though Patricia usually answered and provided updates on his condition before deciding whether he was well enough to speak directly. Even Dad's longtime business partner, Thomas Mitchell, found himself unable to reach Dad directly about time-sensitive company matters. During one visit in June, I noticed Dad seemed confused about a conversation we'd had the previous week regarding a potential acquisition opportunity for his company. He looked genuinely puzzled when I referenced specific details we'd discussed, claiming he didn't remember talking about it at all. Patricia quickly explained that the pain medication was affecting his short-term memory, something the doctors had warned them to expect. She produced a list of potential side effects that included memory problems, cognitive fog, and difficulty concentrating. The explanation made sense medically, but something felt inconsistent. Dad remembered business details from months earlier with perfect clarity, could discuss complex insurance policies without hesitation, and seemed sharp during conversations about topics that interested him. His memory problems appeared selective, affecting only recent family interactions or discussions about company decisions. It was as if someone was controlling which information reached him and which of his thoughts were shared with us. My professional instincts kicked in during a family barbecue in July 2023. Dad seemed more energetic than he'd been in weeks, joking with Marcus about his latest software project and asking Rebecca detailed questions about her hospital rotation schedule. But when Patricia returned from taking a phone call, the atmosphere shifted. Dad suddenly appeared tired, mentioning that he needed to rest because his treatment was more exhausting than expected. The timing struck me as odd. Patricia had been gone for 20 minutes, and Dad had been animated and engaged the entire time. The moment she reappeared, claiming her call had run long because she was coordinating his next appointment, Dad's demeanor changed completely. He excused himself to lie down, leaving us to clean up, while Patricia explained that his energy came in unpredictable bursts that shouldn't be encouraged. I started paying closer attention to these patterns.
During subsequent visits, I noticed that Dad's alertness and engagement varied dramatically depending on Patricia's presence. When she stepped out to run errands or attend her real estate appointments, Dad would become more talkative, asking about our lives and sharing stories about his business dealings. The moment she returned, he'd claim fatigue or mention feeling overwhelmed by too much conversation. My forensic accounting background had trained me to recognize inconsistencies in financial records, but these same analytical skills applied to human behavior patterns. Patricia's explanations for Dad's condition always sounded medically reasonable, but they didn't align with what I observed directly. She'd reference conversations with doctors that none of us had been present for, mention treatment side effects that seemed to manifest only during family visits, and describe symptoms that Dad didn't exhibit when speaking privately. In August, I decided to research Dad's medical team independently. As his daughter and emergency contact, I had legal rights to verify his treatment plan with his oncologist, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez. When I called Dr. Rodriguez's office, her nurse confirmed that Dad's recovery was progressing excellently, ahead of schedule actually, and that his cognitive function remained completely normal. The memory issues and fatigue Patricia described weren't consistent with his actual medical status. Dr. Rodriguez agreed to meet with me privately, expressing concern that she'd been receiving conflicting information about Dad's condition from different sources. Patricia had called multiple times reporting symptoms that Dad never mentioned during his appointments, requesting medication adjustments for problems that didn't appear medically, and described symptoms that Dad didn't exhibit when speaking privately. "Your father is doing remarkably well," Dr. Rodriguez explained during our confidential meeting. "His cancer was caught early, responded perfectly to treatment, and he should have decades of healthy life ahead of him. I'm puzzled by the reports I've been getting about cognitive decline and severe fatigue. When I examine him, he's sharp, energetic, and optimistic about the future."
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. This conversation confirmed my growing suspicions that Patricia was deliberately misrepresenting Dad's condition to control family access and manipulate our perceptions of his capabilities, but I needed concrete evidence before making accusations that could damage Dad's marriage and potentially his health during recovery. I decided to document everything systematically, using the same methodical approach I employed when investigating financial fraud cases. I began keeping detailed notes about every interaction with Dad and Patricia, recording dates, times, witnesses, and specific conversations. I also started using my phone's voice memo function to capture important discussions, particularly when Patricia made statements about Dad's condition or future plans that seemed inconsistent with reality. Oregon's consent laws allowed me to record conversations I participated in, provided I wasn't deliberately trying to gather evidence of criminal activity. The recordings revealed disturbing patterns in Patricia's behavior. She spoke differently about Dad when he wasn't present, expressing frustration with his neediness and complaining about the burden of caring for someone with serious health problems. During one conversation with her sister Karen over lunch, which I overheard while visiting Dad, Patricia described him as declining faster than expected and mentioned that she might need to make difficult decisions about his care soon. These statements contradicted everything Dr. Rodriguez had told me about Dad's excellent prognosis. Patricia was creating a narrative of decline and dependency that didn't match Dad's actual medical condition. More concerning, she was positioning herself as the primary decision-maker for someone who was mentally competent and physically recovering well from a highly treatable form of cancer. I also began investigating Patricia's financial activities during this period. As a forensic accountant, I knew how to research property records, loan applications, and business filings without raising suspicion. What I discovered was alarming. Patricia had been extremely active in real estate transactions since marrying Dad, purchasing and flipping properties at a pace that required significant capital investment. The financing for these ventures appeared to come from repeatedly refinancing Dad's house and taking out lines of credit against his business assets. Each refinancing increased the debt load while providing Patricia with cash for her property investments. Dad's name was on all the loan documents, but the signature analysis suggested Patricia might have been signing on his behalf using power of attorney privileges she'd somehow obtained.
Most troubling, Patricia had established several limited liability companies in her name alone, despite using Dad's credit and assets to fund their operations. These LLCs owned properties that Patricia bought, renovated, and sold, with all profits flowing to accounts that only she controlled. Dad was providing the financial backing, but Patricia was retaining exclusive ownership of the resulting assets and profits. Through my professional network, I learned that Patricia had been telling other real estate agents that her husband was in declining health and that she expected to inherit his assets sooner rather than later. She'd even made preliminary inquiries about selling Dad's insurance business, claiming she needed to prepare for the inevitable and ensure smooth transitions for his clients when he becomes unable to work. These conversations revealed Patricia's true expectations about Dad's future. Despite Dr. Rodriguez's excellent prognosis, Patricia was planning for Dad's death or incapacity within a relatively short time frame. She was positioning herself to inherit or control his assets while simultaneously building her own wealth using his credit and property as collateral. I shared my findings with Marcus and Rebecca during a private video call in September. Both confirmed they'd noticed similar inconsistencies in Patricia's behavior and statements about Dad's condition. Marcus mentioned that Patricia had asked him detailed questions about Dad's business operations, particularly about client contracts, asset valuations, and succession planning. She framed these inquiries as helping her understand Dad's work, but Marcus found her focus on financial details rather than operational aspects suspicious. Rebecca had medical concerns about Patricia's descriptions of Dad's symptoms. As a resident physician, she recognized that Patricia's reports of cognitive decline, severe fatigue, and emotional instability weren't consistent with Dad's cancer type or treatment regimen. Rebecca had quietly consulted with oncology specialists at her hospital who confirmed that Dad's specific diagnosis and treatment plan shouldn't produce the dramatic side effects Patricia described. We agreed that Patricia was deliberately creating false narratives about Dad's health while systematically positioning herself to benefit financially from his supposed decline. The evidence strongly suggested she was planning for scenarios that her own actions might help precipitate. But proving financial manipulation or medical interference would require more concrete documentation than we currently possess. I decided to expand my investigation by hiring a private investigator, someone with experience in elder abuse and financial exploitation cases. Through my professional contacts, I found Catherine Walsh, a former police detective who specialized in complex fraud investigations. Catherine agreed to conduct background research on Patricia while I continued documenting her current activity. Catherine's preliminary report was eye-opening. Patricia's real estate career wasn't as successful as she'd claimed. Her sales volume was modest, her client base was small, and her income was barely sufficient to support her expensive lifestyle before marrying Dad. More significantly, Patricia had been involved in 2 previous relationships with older, financially successful men, both of which ended abruptly when the men discovered financial irregularities. The first relationship involved a retired aerospace engineer who discovered Patricia had been using his credit cards without authorization to fund property investments. The second was a widowed restaurant owner who caught Patricia attempting to forge his signature on loan documents. Neither man had pressed charges, apparently preferring to end the relationships quietly rather than pursue legal action, but both had warned other potential romantic interests about Patricia's behavior.
Armed with this background information and my growing collection of recorded conversations, I felt confident that Patricia posed a genuine threat to Dad's financial security and potentially his health. But I also knew that Dad loved her and believed she was caring for him during his recovery. Confronting him directly might damage our relationship without protecting him from Patricia's manipulation. The situation was becoming increasingly urgent as Patricia's confidence grew. She'd begun making assumptions about Dad's assets and future plans that suggested she expected to gain control of his finances soon. Her timeline seemed to be accelerating, possibly because Dad's actual recovery was progressing too well to support her narrative of decline and dependency. October 2023 brought a revelation that changed everything. I was reviewing Dad's business insurance policies for annual renewals when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Patricia had been listed as a beneficiary on Dad's key person life insurance policy, a $1.2 million policy that was supposed to protect the business if Dad became unable to work. The beneficiary change had been processed in August, right after his cancer treatment began.
The timing was suspicious enough, but what shocked me was the method. The change request bore Dad's signature, but having seen thousands of financial documents in my forensic accounting career, I knew this signature didn't match his usual pattern. The pen pressure was different, the letter formation was slightly off, and most tellingly, Dad was left-handed, but this signature showed characteristics of someone writing with their non-dominant hand, trying to mimic his style. I immediately contacted Mutual Pacific Insurance, the company that held Dad's policy. Speaking with claims manager Robert Chen, I learned that Patricia had called multiple times asking about policy details, beneficiary procedures, and specifically about how quickly claims could be processed in cases of terminal illness. She'd identified herself as Dad's wife and medical advocate, claiming she needed the information to help with end-of-life planning. Shen mentioned that Patricia had seemed unusually focused on accelerated benefit options, which allow policyholders to access death benefits early if diagnosed with terminal conditions. She'd asked detailed questions about medical documentation requirements and whether cognitive decline could qualify someone for these accelerated payouts. Most disturbing, she'd inquired about the appeals process if initial claims were denied, suggesting she was preparing for potential challenges to benefit requests. This discovery prompted me to examine all of Dad's financial accounts more thoroughly. Using my professional access to public records and financial databases, I uncovered a systematic pattern of changes to Dad's estate planning that had occurred throughout his treatment period. Patricia had somehow gained power of attorney privileges and was using them to modify beneficiaries, adjust account access, and restructure asset ownership in ways that increasingly favored her interests. The most significant change involved Dad's retirement accounts, worth approximately $800,000. The beneficiary designations had been changed from his 3 children to Patricia, with a secondary designation listing her sister Karen as backup beneficiary. These changes had been processed in July, shortly after Dad's surgery, when he would have been recovering and potentially medicated, making him more vulnerable to manipulation. I also discovered that Patricia had opened several new credit lines using Dad's business as collateral, accumulating nearly $300,000 in additional debt that she was using to fund increasingly ambitious property investments. Her real estate ventures were becoming more aggressive, purchasing distressed commercial properties that required significant renovation costs. The financial risk was enormous, but all the liability fell on Dad's assets, while profits flowed to Patricia's personal accounts. Through Catherine Walsh's continued investigation, we learned that Patricia had been networking with other individuals who specialized in exploiting vulnerable elderly targets. She'd attended several seminars on wealth preservation strategies that were actually workshops teaching psychological manipulation techniques for accessing older adults' financial assets. These seminars covered topics like isolating targets from family members, creating dependency relationships, and documenting cognitive decline to support legal challenges. Catherine discovered that Patricia had purchased several books on elder psychology, medical advocacy, and estate planning that weren't focused on genuine caregiving, but rather on understanding legal vulnerabilities and exploitation opportunities. Her internet search history, which Catherine accessed through digital forensics contacts, revealed extensive research on induced medical conditions, drug interactions that could cause confusion, and methods for accelerating age-related decline. Most chilling was evidence that Patricia had been corresponding with Dr. Franklin Morrison, a physician whose medical license had been suspended for inappropriate prescription practices. Their email exchanges, which Catherine obtained through her investigation network, discussed treatment options for Dad that weren't medically indicated but could create symptoms supporting Patricia's narrative of decline. Morrison had apparently been advising Patricia on medications that could induce confusion, fatigue, and memory problems. In November, I decided to confront Dad directly despite the risks. During one of Patricia's real estate appointments, I visited him alone and carefully broached the subject of his recent financial changes. Dad seemed genuinely surprised when I mentioned the insurance beneficiary modifications and retirement account adjustments. He claimed he didn't remember making those changes and asked to see the documentation.
When I showed him copies of the forms, Dad's reaction was immediate and alarmed. He didn't recognize his own signatures on several documents and was particularly disturbed by the power of attorney papers that gave Patricia broad authority over his financial decisions. "I never signed this," he said, studying the document carefully. Patricia mentioned something about legal paperwork for medical emergencies, but nothing this comprehensive. Dad revealed that Patricia had been presenting him with various documents to sign throughout his treatment, always when he was tired or medicated, explaining they were routine medical forms or insurance updates. She'd typically bring them to him late in the evening or early morning, when his attention was focused on recovery rather than legal details. He trusted her explanations and signed without reading carefully, assuming she was handling necessary administrative tasks. This conversation marked a turning point in Dad's awareness of Patricia's manipulation. He asked me to help him review all recent financial transactions and legal documents, expressing growing concern about the extent of changes he didn't remember authorizing. We agreed that I would work with his attorney, Samuel Brooks, to understand the full scope of Patricia's alterations to his estate planning and business affairs. Samuel Brooks had been Dad's attorney for over 15 years, handling everything from business contracts to Mom's estate planning. When we met to review recent changes, Brooks admitted he'd been uncomfortable with many of Patricia's requests, but felt obligated to follow his client's apparent instructions. Patricia had accompanied Dad to most meetings, answering questions on his behalf and explaining that his treatment was affecting his ability to focus on complex legal matters. Brooks revealed that Patricia had been pressuring him to draft new estate planning documents that would give her primary control over Dad's assets if he became incapacitated. She'd framed these requests as protecting Dad from the burden of financial management during his health challenges, but Brooks found her urgency and specific demands suspicious. She seemed more interested in gaining control than in protecting Dad's interests. Most concerning, Patricia had asked Brooks about the legal requirements for having someone declared mentally incompetent, claiming she was worried about Dad's cognitive decline and wanted to be prepared to protect him if necessary. She'd requested information about guardianship procedures and how quickly they could be implemented if Dad's condition deteriorated rapidly. Brooks had provided general information, but privately worried about Patricia's motivations. Dad was horrified to learn about these conversations. His cognitive function was excellent, his business decisions remained sharp, and he had no symptoms of mental decline beyond the occasional fatigue from cancer treatment. Patricia's discussions with Brooks revealed that she was planning scenarios that would give her complete control over his life and assets, scenarios that had no basis in his actual medical condition. We decided that Dad needed to revoke Patricia's power of attorney immediately and implement new safeguards to protect his assets from further manipulation. Brooks drafted revocation documents and scheduled a comprehensive review of Dad's entire estate plan to undo unauthorized changes and establish new protections against financial exploitation. However, we also realized that confronting Patricia directly would likely trigger an escalation in her behavior. If she suspected that Dad was becoming aware of her manipulation, she might accelerate her plans or take more drastic measures to secure the assets she'd been working to acquire. We needed to move carefully to protect Dad while gathering enough evidence to prevent Patricia from continuing her exploitation. Catherine Walsh recommended that we document everything before making any direct accusations. Patricia's pattern of behavior suggested she was building towards a major financial grab, possibly timed to coincide with what she hoped would be Dad's declining health or death. By moving too quickly, we risked pushing her into more desperate actions that could genuinely endanger Dad's well-being. The evidence was overwhelming that Patricia had been systematically manipulating Dad's finances while creating false narratives about his health to justify her increasing control. But proving her intentions definitively would require catching her in the act of her most egregious planned deceptions. We needed to be strategic about timing our intervention to maximize Dad's protection while ensuring Patricia faced appropriate consequences for her exploitation. December 2023 became a month of careful strategy and shocking discoveries. Dad and I decided to let Patricia believe her manipulation was still undetected, while we methodically documented her activities and reversed her unauthorized changes. Samuel Brooks worked discreetly to revoke Patricia's power of attorney and restore Dad's original estate planning, but we timed these legal actions to avoid triggering Patricia's suspicions until we were fully prepared.
The first breakthrough came when Catherine Walsh installed discreet recording equipment in Dad's home office, a room Patricia rarely entered, but where she often took private phone calls when she thought Dad was sleeping. Oregon surveillance laws allowed recording in private residences with the owner's consent, and Dad was eager to understand the full extent of Patricia's deception. What we captured over the next 2 weeks was far worse than we'd imagined. Patricia's conversations revealed a complex network of accomplices working to exploit Dad systematically. Her sister Karen wasn't just an innocent relative, but an active participant who was helping to establish offshore accounts where stolen assets could be hidden. During one recorded call, Patricia discussed transferring Dad's liquid investments to accounts in the Cayman Islands, timing the transfers to coincide with what she called the final phase.
More disturbing were Patricia's conversations with Dr. Franklin Morrison, the suspended physician who was advising her on medical manipulation strategies. Morrison had been providing Patricia with prescription medications that weren't prescribed for Dad but could be administered secretly to create symptoms of cognitive decline and physical weakness. Patricia had been gradually introducing these substances into Dad's evening meals, timing the doses to coincide with family visits when witnesses would observe his apparent deterioration. The recordings captured Patricia discussing specific drugs with Morrison, including sedatives that would cause confusion and memory problems, and medications that would induce fatigue and disorientation. Morrison advised her on dosages that would create believable symptoms without triggering medical attention, essentially helping her poison Dad slowly while maintaining plausible deniability about his declining health. Most chilling was a conversation where Patricia and Morrison discussed accelerating the timeline because Dad's actual recovery was progressing too well to support their narrative. Morrison suggested increasing medication doses or introducing substances that would cause more dramatic symptoms, potentially triggering hospitalization that could provide opportunities for Patricia to gain emergency guardianship over Dad's medical and financial decisions. Catherine's investigation also uncovered Patricia's connection to a criminal organization specializing in elder financial abuse. Through digital forensics, we learned that Patricia had been attending training sessions organized by Victor Sandoval, a convicted fraud specialist who taught sophisticated exploitation techniques to groups of conspirators. Sandoval's network targeted affluent elderly individuals using romance scams, medical manipulation, and legal exploitation to systematically steal their assets. Patricia had paid substantial fees to join Sandoval's program, which provided detailed guides on identifying vulnerable targets, establishing dependency relationships, and executing complex financial theft while minimizing legal risks. The program even included template legal documents, forged signature techniques, and strategies for manipulating healthcare providers to support false narratives of victim incapacity. Through this network, Patricia had access to corrupt professionals, including attorneys, doctors, and financial advisors, who would provide false documentation supporting her claims about Dad's declining health and need for protective intervention. The conspiracy was far more sophisticated than simple opportunistic theft. It was an organized criminal enterprise that had successfully exploited dozens of elderly victims across multiple states. In early January 2024, Patricia's behavior became increasingly aggressive as Dad's genuine health improvement made her timeline untenable. She began pressuring Dad to sign new legal documents that would give her immediate control over his business operations, claiming that his cancer treatment had left him unable to handle complex decisions effectively. When Dad refused, citing his excellent recovery progress, Patricia became visibly frustrated and accused him of being in denial about his condition. Patricia also escalated her financial activities, attempting to access larger amounts of Dad's capital for increasingly risky investment ventures. She presented Dad with opportunities to purchase entire apartment complexes and commercial developments that would require liquidating his retirement accounts and borrowing against her business assets. When Dad expressed concerns about the financial risks, Patricia accused him of losing his business instincts due to treatment-related cognitive effects. The most alarming escalation came when Patricia began contacting Dad's business clients directly, informing them that Dad's health was declining rapidly and that they should prepare for transitions in account management.
She positioned herself as the person who would handle their insurance needs going forward, claiming that Dad had asked her to gradually take over client relationships to reduce his stress during recovery. Several longtime clients contacted Dad directly to express concern about these conversations, revealing that Patricia had painted a picture of serious cognitive decline and physical deterioration that bore no resemblance to Dad's actual condition. When confronted, Patricia claimed she was simply being proactive about business continuity planning, but her descriptions of Dad's supposed incapacity were so dramatic that clients were considering canceling their policies rather than working with someone they believed was mentally incompetent. This client contact strategy revealed Patricia's ultimate goal. She was positioning herself to inherit not just Dad's personal assets, but to claim ownership of his insurance business, based on her false narrative of medical necessity. She'd been building a case for guardianship that would give her legal control over both Dad's personal life and his professional operations, effectively stealing a multi-million-dollar business through fraudulent claims about medical necessity. Dad was devastated to learn how extensively Patricia had undermined his professional reputation while claiming to care for his well-being. His business was his life's work, built over decades of careful relationship building with clients who trusted his expertise and integrity. Patricia's actions threatened to destroy these relationships permanently, regardless of whether her theft ultimately succeeded. We realized that Patricia was accelerating toward a final grab for Dad's assets, possibly timed to coincide with what she hoped would be his actual death from the secret poisoning or a manufactured medical emergency. Her conversations with Morrison suggested they were planning to induce a health crisis that would justify emergency interventions and fast-track legal procedures, giving Patricia control over Dad's affairs. The evidence Catherine had gathered painted a picture of premeditated elder abuse involving multiple felonies: fraud, forgery, attempted poisoning, conspiracy, and organized theft. But Patricia's network was sophisticated enough that we needed ironclad documentation to ensure successful prosecution and prevent her from escaping with any of Dad's assets. Samuel Brooks advised us that the best approach would be to catch Patricia in the act of her most serious crimes while ensuring Dad's safety throughout the process. We arranged for Dad to stay with Rebecca in Chicago temporarily, officially for extended family time during his recovery, but actually to remove him from Patricia's immediate access while we gathered final evidence.
Patricia's reaction to Dad's extended absence was immediate and telling. She began calling Rebecca's hospital constantly, claiming medical emergencies that required Dad's immediate return home. She contacted Dr. Rodriguez's office multiple times, reporting that Dad was exhibiting concerning symptoms in Chicago and needed to return to Portland for emergency treatment. When these tactics failed, she threatened to involve Adult Protective Services, claiming Dad's children were preventing him from receiving necessary medical care. These desperate attempts to regain control over Dad's location and access revealed that Patricia's timeline was more urgent than we'd realized. Something was forcing her to accelerate her plans, possibly because her financial obligations to Sandoval's criminal network required immediate payment, or because she'd already committed to asset transfers that needed Dad's cooperation or incapacitation to complete. Catherine arranged for surveillance of Patricia's activities during Dad's absence, documenting her attempts to access his business offices, contact his financial advisors, and meet with individuals who appeared to be part of Sandoval's criminal network. Patricia's behavior during this period provided the final evidence we needed to prove her criminal intent and the immediate danger she posed to Dad's safety and financial security. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose Patricia's entire conspiracy while protecting Dad from further exploitation. But we also knew that cornering Patricia could trigger desperate actions that might put Dad at genuine physical risk. Our next steps would need to be carefully coordinated with law enforcement to ensure justice while guaranteeing Dad's safety throughout the process. February 2024 brought the climax we'd been building toward, but not in the way any of us expected. Patricia's desperation reached a breaking point when she realized Dad wasn't returning to Portland as quickly as she'd anticipated. Through our surveillance, Catherine documented Patricia meeting with Victor Sandoval himself at a downtown hotel, their conversation captured through directional microphones and telephoto photography that would be admissible in court.
During this meeting, Sandoval pressured Patricia to deliver on her promises of accessing Dad's assets immediately. The criminal network had advanced her significant money for the operation, expecting returns that Patricia could only provide by gaining complete control over Dad's finances. Sandoval made it clear that failure wasn't an option, mentioning consequences that suggested Patricia's own safety was now at risk if she couldn't deliver the promised payoff. Patricia's response was to propose something that shocked even Sandoval's criminal sensibilities. She suggested staging Dad's death entirely, using Morrison's medical connections to create false death certificates while Dad was actually being held captive until she could access and transfer all his assets. The plan would involve kidnapping Dad during his return to Portland, keeping him sedated and hidden while Patricia mourned publicly and processed inheritance paperwork as his grieving widow. Sandoval rejected this plan as too risky and likely to trigger extensive investigation, but Patricia's willingness to consider it revealed how far she was prepared to go. The recordings captured her stating that she'd invested too much time and effort into this relationship to accept anything less than complete financial success, regardless of the consequences for Dad's actual well-being or survival. This conversation prompted immediate action from our legal team. Samuel Brooks contacted District Attorney Michael Chen, presenting our evidence package and requesting emergency intervention to protect Dad from imminent danger. The DA's office had been investigating Sandoval's network for months without sufficient evidence to prosecute, and our recordings provided the breakthrough they needed to bring down the entire organization. However, DA Chen advised that the most effective approach would be to allow Patricia to attempt her final scheme while under complete surveillance, ensuring we could catch her in the act of the most serious crimes while protecting Dad throughout the process. The plan required Dad to return to Portland and pretend normalcy while wearing recording equipment and maintaining constant security protection. Dad agreed to this dangerous strategy, understanding that his cooperation was necessary to protect other elderly victims from Sandoval's network and to ensure Patricia faced full consequences for her crimes. Rebecca took leave from her medical residency to accompany Dad back to Portland, ostensibly for continued family support during his recovery, but actually to provide additional witness protection and medical monitoring. The trap was elaborate and carefully coordinated. Dad would return home and behave normally, while law enforcement monitored all communications and activities around the house. Patricia would be allowed to believe she was regaining control, while actually providing evidence of her most serious criminal intentions. The plan included having Dad wear recording devices during all interactions with Patricia, ensuring every conversation would be documented for prosecution. Patricia's reaction to Dad's return was immediately suspicious. She seemed almost relieved, but also noticeably nervous, asking detailed questions about his time in Chicago and expressing concern that Rebecca's influence might have confused him about his medical condition. She insisted on scheduling immediate appointments with Dr. Rodriguez to reassess his treatment needs and began preparing what she claimed were important legal documents that required his signature. Within 48 hours of Dad's return, Patricia attempted to implement what we now knew was her final strategy. She presented Dad with documents supposedly related to streamlining his business operations during his continued recovery, but our legal analysis revealed they were actually asset transfer agreements that would give Patricia immediate ownership of his most valuable properties and accounts.
When Dad refused to sign these documents, claiming he wanted to review them with his attorney first, Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. She became openly hostile, accusing Dad of being manipulated by his children who didn't understand his true medical condition. She claimed that his refusal to cooperate with her financial planning proved he was experiencing cognitive decline that required immediate intervention. This confrontation escalated when Patricia threatened to have Dad involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation if he continued to resist her attempts to protect his interests. She claimed to have documentation from medical professionals supporting her assessment of his declining mental capacity, though we knew this documentation was fraudulent and prepared by Morrison's network of corrupt healthcare providers. The recording equipment captured Patricia making explicit threats about Dad's future, stating that she would do whatever was necessary to ensure his assets were properly managed, even if that meant having him declared legally incompetent against his will.
She mentioned having contacts within the healthcare and legal systems who would support her guardianship petition based on the medical evidence she'd been carefully constructing. Most damning was Patricia's admission that she'd been preparing for this moment since shortly after their marriage, acknowledging that her entire relationship with Dad was planned around accessing his wealth. She expressed frustration that his recovery was complicating her timeline, but insisted that she'd invested too much effort to abandon her plans now. The next day, Patricia made her most serious mistake. Believing Dad was sufficiently isolated and dependent on her care, she attempted to administer what we later learned was a potentially lethal dose of the sedatives Morrison had provided. Catherine's surveillance team captured Patricia crushing pills into Dad's evening medication, an action that constituted attempted murder in addition to her previous crimes. Law enforcement intervened immediately when Patricia began administering the tampered medication. Dad had been warned to avoid anything Patricia prepared for him, but seeing her actually attempt poisoning triggered the emergency response protocol we'd established. Within minutes, police and medical personnel surrounded the house, ensuring Dad's safety while arresting Patricia in the act of attempted murder. Patricia's arrest was swift and comprehensive. The evidence package we'd assembled over months provided probable cause for charges including fraud, forgery, elder abuse, conspiracy, attempted murder, and racketeering in connection with Sandoval's criminal enterprise. Her attempts to destroy evidence were futile because Catherine had been monitoring her digital communications and financial activities throughout the investigation. Dr. Morrison was arrested simultaneously at his Portland clinic, where police discovered extensive evidence of his involvement in elder abuse schemes affecting dozens of victims beyond Dad. His medical records revealed a pattern of providing fraudulent disability assessments and inappropriate medications to support financial exploitation schemes organized by Sandoval's network. The arrests triggered a massive investigation that ultimately exposed elder abuse operations in 7 states, leading to dozens of arrests and the recovery of millions in stolen assets. Dad's willingness to participate in the sting operation provided the evidence needed to prosecute not just Patricia individually, but the entire criminal enterprise that had victimized countless elderly Americans. However, Patricia's arrest revealed one final twist that surprised everyone involved. During her booking process, she provided information about an even larger conspiracy involving corrupt judges, probate attorneys, and healthcare administrators who had been facilitating elder abuse on an industrial scale. Patricia's cooperation with this broader investigation became her only leverage for potentially reducing her own sentences. The scope of corruption Patricia revealed was staggering, involving court officials who expedited guardianship proceedings based on fraudulent medical evidence, attorneys who drafted illegal asset transfer documents, and healthcare administrators who falsified patient records to support exploitation schemes. Patricia had been just one operator in a vast network that had been systematically stealing from elderly victims for years. This revelation meant that Patricia's case would become part of a federal investigation involving multiple jurisdictions and potentially hundreds of victims. While this ensured that the broader criminal enterprise would be dismantled, it also meant that Patricia's prosecution would be more complex and time-consuming than we'd initially anticipated. Dad was finally safe from immediate danger, but the full extent of Patricia's crimes and their lasting impact on his life and business would continue to unfold for months to come. March 2024 brought an unexpected turn when Dad suddenly collapsed at home just 2 weeks after Patricia's arrest. The stress of the investigation, combined with the emotional trauma of discovering the extent of Patricia's betrayal, had taken a severe toll on his health. What we initially feared was a heart attack turned out to be a stress-induced cardiac episode that, while not life-threatening, required immediate hospitalization and careful monitoring. During Dad's 3-day hospital stay, doctors discovered that the medications Patricia had been secretly administering had caused more damage than we'd realized. The toxicology reports revealed traces of substances that had been affecting Dad's cardiovascular system for months, potentially contributing to symptoms we'd attributed to cancer treatment. Dr. Rodriguez was horrified to learn that many of Dad's supposed treatment side effects had actually been poisoning symptoms that Patricia had successfully disguised as normal recovery challenges. The medical team worked to flush the remaining toxins from Dad's system while monitoring for potential long-term effects from Patricia's systematic poisoning. Fortunately, Dad's underlying health was excellent, and his body responded well to treatment once the foreign substances were eliminated. However, the incident served as a stark reminder of how close Patricia had come to causing permanent damage or even Dad's death through her calculated medical manipulation.
While Dad recovered in the hospital, Samuel Brooks received an unexpected call from Patricia's attorney, demanding an immediate meeting about Dad's estate planning. Patricia's legal team claimed they had discovered irregularities in Dad's recent will modifications and were prepared to challenge any changes made after her arrest. They argued that Dad's emotional state following the criminal charges made him vulnerable to undue influence from his children, potentially invalidating recent legal documents. This legal challenge forced us to accelerate our timeline for formalizing Dad's estate planning. Brooks worked with Dad during his hospital stay to create a comprehensive new will that would be legally bulletproof against any challenges Patricia might mount from prison. The new document explicitly revoked all previous versions and included detailed explanations of Dad's mental competency and decision-making capacity at the time of execution. More importantly, Dad decided to include specific language in his will addressing Patricia's criminal behavior and the reasons for her complete exclusion from his estate. He wanted the document to serve as a permanent record of her betrayal, ensuring that any future legal challenges would require acknowledging the criminal charges against her. This strategy would make it virtually impossible for Patricia to contest the will without effectively confessing to the crimes she was charged with. The new will designated his 3 children as primary beneficiaries of his estate, including the family home, his insurance business, all investment accounts, and personal property. Patricia would receive nothing beyond what she was legally entitled to as a surviving spouse under Oregon law, which amounted to approximately $15,000 in personal effects that had been gifts during their marriage. However, Dad's most strategic decision was creating a detailed trust structure that would protect his assets from any future legal challenges while ensuring his children could manage his affairs if his health declined genuinely in the future. The trust included specific provisions preventing any of his assets from being used to pay Patricia's legal fees or criminal restitution, effectively insulating his estate from any financial consequences of her crimes. As Dad's health stabilized and he prepared for discharge, we received news that Patricia's federal case was moving forward rapidly. The evidence we'd provided had been crucial in building cases against 17 other defendants in Sandoval's criminal network, including 3 judges who had been accepting bribes to expedite fraudulent guardianship proceedings. Patricia's cooperation with federal investigators was earning her some consideration for reduced sentencing, but she still faced decades in prison for her crimes against Dad and other victims. The most shocking revelation came when federal investigators revealed that Patricia had been operating under a false identity for years. Her real name was Patricia Williams, and she had an extensive criminal history involving identity theft, check fraud, and previous elder abuse convictions in other states. The Patricia Hendricks identity she'd used to marry Dad was completely fabricated, making their marriage legally invalid and eliminating any claim she might have had to spousal inheritance rights. This discovery meant that Patricia had no legal standing to challenge Dad's estate planning at all. As someone who had fraudulently married him under false pretenses, she had never been his legitimate wife, and therefore had no spousal rights to consider in his will. The revelation simplified our legal position considerably, while adding additional federal charges for identity fraud and bigamy to Patricia's already extensive criminal case. Dad was released from the hospital in early April, physically recovered but emotionally processing the magnitude of Patricia's deception. Learning that their entire marriage had been based on a false identity added another layer of betrayal that was difficult to comprehend. The woman he'd loved and trusted with his life had never actually existed. Patricia Hendricks was simply a character created to exploit his vulnerability after Mom's death. Despite the emotional challenges, Dad was determined to move forward with rebuilding his life and business. The publicity surrounding Patricia's arrest had initially concerned him, but the community response was overwhelmingly supportive. Dad's clients appreciated learning the truth about the confusing messages they'd received from Patricia about his supposed cognitive decline, and many expressed admiration for his courage in exposing the criminal network that had victimized so many elderly people. The insurance industry recognized Dad's case as a significant example of elder abuse prevention, and he was invited to speak at conferences about recognizing and preventing financial exploitation.
His experience became a valuable resource for training other professionals to identify the warning signs of systematic elder abuse and protect their clients from similar schemes. In May 2024, just as Dad was regaining his emotional equilibrium, we received the call that would provide the perfect closure to this traumatic chapter. Samuel Brooks contacted us with news that Dad's will reading had been scheduled. Not because Dad had died, but because Patricia's legal team was mounting a final desperate challenge to his estate from prison. Patricia's attorneys were arguing that Dad's exclusion of her from his will constituted evidence of mental incompetency, claiming that no reasonable person would completely disinherit a devoted spouse who had provided care during his cancer treatment. They were requesting a court-ordered competency evaluation and demanding that Patricia be restored to her position as primary beneficiary of Dad's estate.
The hearing was scheduled for Memorial Day weekend, with Judge Catherine Reynolds presiding. Brooks assured us that Patricia's challenge had no legal merit, especially given her criminal convictions and fraudulent identity, but he wanted the entire family present to demonstrate Dad's strong support system and mental clarity. The hearing would essentially be Patricia's final attempt to claim Dad's assets, even from prison. What Patricia didn't know was that Dad had been recording conversations with her throughout their marriage, documentation that would prove her systematic manipulation and criminal intent from the very beginning of their relationship. The will reading would become an opportunity to present this evidence publicly, ensuring that Patricia's true character was part of the permanent legal record. More importantly, Dad had prepared a statement to be read at the hearing that would detail exactly why he was excluding Patricia from his estate, including specific examples of her criminal behavior and the impact of her betrayal on his life and family. The statement would serve as Dad's final word on their relationship and his reasons for ensuring she received nothing from the estate she had tried so hard to steal. The stage was set for a final courtroom confrontation that would determine not only the fate of Dad's estate, but also provide public vindication for the trauma Patricia had inflicted on our entire family. For Patricia, this hearing represented her last chance to claim any victory from her elaborate criminal scheme. For Dad, it was an opportunity to reclaim his dignity and ensure that justice was finally, completely served. Memorial Day weekend 2024 arrived with unseasonable rain in Portland, but nothing could dampen our spirits as we prepared for what would be Patricia's final legal challenge. The courtroom of Judge Catherine Reynolds was packed beyond capacity, with local media, federal investigators, and representatives from elder advocacy groups all present to witness what had become a landmark case in elder abuse prosecution. Patricia appeared via video link from the Federal Detention Center, where she was being held pending sentencing. Even through the grainy prison video system, her transformation was shocking. Gone was the polished, confident real estate agent who had charmed Dad 4 years earlier. Patricia looked haggard, desperate, and defeated, her orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive designer clothes she'd worn while spending Dad's money on her lavish lifestyle. Her legal team had assembled an impressive array of arguments, claiming that Dad's complete exclusion of Patricia from his estate was evidence of mental manipulation by his children. They argued that no rational person would disinherit a spouse who had provided dedicated medical care during cancer treatment, suggesting that Dad's decision-making capacity had been compromised by trauma from the criminal investigation. Patricia's lead attorney, Jonathan Pierce, painted a picture of a devoted wife whose only crime was loving her husband too much and making mistakes while trying to protect his financial interests during his illness. Pierce argued that the criminal charges against Patricia were exaggerated, claiming she was being scapegoated for a larger criminal conspiracy she had minimal involvement in. Judge Reynolds listened patiently to these arguments before calling Samuel Brooks to present Dad's position. Brooks began by establishing Dad's complete mental competency through recent medical evaluations, business performance records, and testimony from colleagues who confirmed his sharp decision-making abilities throughout the entire period in question. Then, Brooks played the recording that changed everything in the courtroom. It was Patricia's voice from Dad's funeral reception, captured on my phone as she casually announced her plans to sell our family home. "I've been waiting for this moment for years," her voice echoed through the courtroom speakers. "William never understood that I married him for his assets, not his affection.
The cancer was just convenient timing. The courtroom erupted as Patricia's own words contradicted everything her legal team had argued about her devotion and care. But Brooks wasn't finished. He played additional recordings from throughout their marriage, conversations where Patricia discussed her plans to inherit Dad's wealth while systematically isolating him from his children and manipulating his medical care. Most damning was a recording from just weeks before Dad's cancer diagnosis, where Patricia could be heard telling someone on the phone that she hoped Dad would develop a serious illness soon because healthy old men live too long and I'm tired of waiting for my payday. The person she was speaking to was later identified as Victor Sandoval, proving that Patricia's criminal conspiracy began long before Dad's cancer provided the cover story she needed. Judge Reynolds called for order as Patricia's video image showed her whispering frantically with her attorneys. Pierce requested a recess to confer with his client, but the judge denied the request and ordered Brooks to continue presenting evidence. What followed was a systematic destruction of every argument Patricia's team had made about her innocent intentions and devoted care. Brooks presented medical evidence showing that Patricia had been secretly administering medications that could have killed Dad, financial records proving she had stolen nearly $400,000 through fraudulent asset transfers, and documentation of her false identity that invalidated their marriage entirely. Each piece of evidence was more devastating than the last, building an overwhelming case that Patricia had never been anything more than a sophisticated criminal targeting Dad's wealth. The most powerful moment came when Dad took the stand to read his prepared statement. His voice was steady and clear as he described the impact of Patricia's betrayal not just on his finances, but on his ability to trust, his relationships with his children, and his sense of security in his own home. Dad explained that excluding Patricia from his estate wasn't vindictive, but protective, ensuring that his life's work would benefit his children rather than reward criminal behavior.
Patricia Williams, or whatever her real name might be, has never been my wife in any meaningful sense, Dad stated, looking directly into the video camera that connected to Patricia's cell. She was a predator who identified me as a target and executed a sophisticated plan to steal everything I had worked my entire life to build. The only mental incapacity in this courtroom belongs to anyone who would suggest I should reward that behavior with an inheritance. Patricia's response was explosive. She began screaming at the video screen, claiming that Dad's children had poisoned him against her and that she deserved compensation for the years she had wasted on their relationship. Her outburst revealed the entitled, manipulative personality that had been hidden beneath her carefully constructed facade of devotion and care. Judge Reynolds ordered Patricia muted and called for final arguments. Pierce made a last desperate attempt to salvage something for his client, arguing that even if Patricia had made mistakes, Oregon law entitled surviving spouses to minimal inheritances regardless of marital misconduct. Brooks countered that Patricia's fraudulent identity and criminal behavior voided any spousal claims, making her legally equivalent to a stranger attempting to steal from Dad's estate. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Judge Reynolds found that Patricia had no legal standing to challenge Dad's estate planning due to her fraudulent identity, criminal convictions, and systematic abuse of Dad throughout their relationship. The court validated Dad's will in its entirety, confirming that Patricia would receive nothing from his estate while his children inherited everything according to his wishes. More importantly, Judge Reynolds ordered Patricia to pay restitution to Dad for all stolen assets, legal fees, and damages related to her criminal behavior. The court also placed a permanent restraining order preventing Patricia from any future contact with Dad or his family members, ensuring that her attempts to manipulate and exploit would end permanently. As Patricia's video feed was disconnected and she was returned to herself, the courtroom erupted in applause. Elder advocacy groups hailed the ruling as a landmark victory that would strengthen protections for elderly Americans against sophisticated financial predators. Federal prosecutors announced that Patricia's case would be used as a template for prosecuting similar crimes nationwide.
The aftermath of the court victory brought unexpected healing for our family. Dad's business not only recovered but thrived as clients appreciated his courage in exposing elder abuse and his commitment to protecting others from similar exploitation. He established the Elena Coleman Foundation in Mom's memory, providing resources for families dealing with elder abuse and funding research into prevention strategies. Marcus relocated back to Portland to help manage Dad's expanded business operations, while Rebecca completed her residency and joined a local medical practice specializing in geriatric care. Our family dinners resumed in the home Patricia had planned to sell, with Mom's garden restored to its original beauty and Dad's spirits genuinely renewed. Patricia Williams was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison for her crimes against Dad and 17 other elderly victims. The criminal network she had participated in was completely dismantled, with sentences totaling over 400 years for all defendants combined. Dad's willingness to serve as the primary witness in these cases helped secure justice for dozens of families who had suffered similar exploitation. 2 years later, Dad met Eleanor Martinez at a volunteer event for the foundation. Eleanor was a retired teacher whose late husband had also been targeted by elder abuse scammers, though she had recognized the warning signs in time to protect his assets. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on shared experiences and genuine compatibility rather than the artificial urgency that had characterized Patricia's manipulation. When Dad and Eleanor married in a small ceremony in Mom's garden, surrounded by family and friends who had supported him through the darkest period of his life, it felt like a true new beginning rather than an attempt to replace what had been lost. Eleanor brought her own children and grandchildren into our extended family, creating the warm, authentic relationships that Patricia had only pretended to offer. The house that Patricia had planned to sell and profit from remained our family home, where Sunday dinners continued the traditions Mom had established and where Dad's grandchildren would grow up surrounded by the love and security that Patricia had tried so hard to destroy. Justice had been served, family had been preserved, and the predator who had targeted our father's vulnerability had been stopped before she could complete her devastating plan. Patricia's final legacy was not the inheritance she had schemed to steal, but the strengthened protections for elderly Americans that resulted from her prosecution and the countless families who were saved from similar exploitation because Dad had the courage to fight back and expose the truth. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.